hello.
Hi, ladies. We have it set up where something's blocking everybody who's in there, so we can't say hi.
Oh my gosh, that's so true. But hi.
But we're so happy to see everybody. And we wanted to do a live session because, well, I think we've wanted to do one for a long time.
Weeks. We've been on lockdown for 4. This is week 4 for us. So hopefully none of you are as deeply into this. Yeah. Welcome and thank you for joining us on this, what is a heavier live than we expected.
Sure.
That one too, sorry.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, so we, first of all, like, you know, everybody is, everybody's going through a pretty hard time right now in the world. And I think that's why it's so important to be able to have people that you can process things with. And luckily I have you and all of, you know, I have a great group of friends and we do, but we hope that you guys are kind of processing what's happening in the world with each other. We wanted this to be also a platform where we could do that. So we are going to say that we had originally kind of planned for this live to be more of like question and answer and touching on a few different topics, but something kind of recent came up in a revelation in the Jiu-Jitsu community and also in the world that we feel like we need to address today. So we're going to really focus on that.
We're going to focus on that. But before we do that, we are going to answer one question that we thought was kind of important, and it's the idea of dealing with isolation. There was a request to ask for advice on dealing with different coping mechanisms that people have. So that's in either interpersonal relationships with friends, family members, partners, coworkers. That is a big deal because you are in an isolated situation with someone who is spending a lot of time with you, and if you are both coping differently, that can be an activator to your negative side or your personal ability to cope, and that is hard.
You want to read the exact question? Do you have it?
It's on my phone.
We're saying never mind
now. So
okay, but that was the gist of it.
But that's the gist of it. So what I'm feeling, what I'm hearing from it is that you potentially have one way that you deal with things. That could be productivity. You dive into something to distract you,
I don't know anything about that.
Yeah, her. Or you can feel all the emotions. I'm a big feeler, so I feel, and then I dump out. But then people around me, like even my own husband, when I dump my emotions anywhere, it's overwhelming to him. So I realized, oh my goodness, my coping mechanism of dumping my emotions triggers his non-safe feeling, and he's a productive one as well. Mm-hmm. So I have to now find a new way or a new person who could hold space for all of my emotional dumping, not take it personal, and not get inflamed when he's trying to protect himself. Do you find that you have different coping mechanisms than Henner?
Well, I think actually our challenge is we have a similar coping mechanism, which is productivity. And in this time where neither one of us are feeling especially productive, it's actually created, I would say, some challenges there because we can't just throw ourselves into this, into being productive. And I think it's actually been an opportunity for me to be more aware of my coping mechanism and the fact that that's what it actually is. And it's forced me to kind of slow down and to, one, recognize that. But this might also be the time where we explore other coping mechanisms, because I think that our coping mechanisms, we go to those in part because there's what's comfortable.
Yeah.
Right? And when you're coping, look, you do what you got to do, right? You do what is comfortable. However, there might be other ways that are ways to cope and ways to kind of process what's going on that are out of your normal wheelhouse. And now might be a good time to look into those. And for me, you know, especially, it's like been practicing mindfulness and downloading some meditation apps and things that I don't honestly do much of, but recognizing now the importance of those and seeing the benefit of those as well.
Yeah, and another thing that could be really helpful, especially for people who are isolated together, is sometimes they'll go on walks together, then they come back together, then they eat together. So there is benefit in saying, okay, you go on a walk, I'm gonna go take a bath. Do the separate, like, filling of your own cups to then come back and find, oh, okay, have you processed? If not, I've processed, so I can be a space holder, and now I'm ready for you, Victoria, to throw your emotions at me. Talking to my husband here. No, I'm kidding. But there are different ways to do this, and as long as you're finding your way to fill your cup, and listen, a lot of people who have lived through either a lot of trauma or chaos in their life, they're finding an interesting state of norm here. This is their calm. Like for me, I'm always in anxiety mode. This is fantastic. What's everyone tripping about? And it's because I grew up having to also contend with all these things that are going on at the same time. And if that's the case, you can find new ways that have worked for you even in growing up, because now that you're an adult, or if there's that inner child in you that hasn't really been nurtured or is wounded by this need to thrive in this way, it's just about shifting it to, okay, as an adult, or now with kids, they're triggering me in ways that they weren't before. How can I shift my survivability? I need to give my kids time, screen time, outdoor time, play in your driveway time, whatever it is, so that you can just sit back and relax, or find your center, or grounding. In our book, in the Women Empowered Handbook, there are grounding techniques that also work during this time. It's not just for when you get triggered on the mat or in these spaces. It's also at home. Finding your fingers, identifying every movement that's happening in your body, finding your breath, turning your mind off for a second, and every time it turns on, just going, peace, quiet, zen, whatever you can do. And if you need to get on a Zoom call and say, hey ladies, let's all Zoom call together and sit in silence. Let's advocate for 5 minutes of silence for each other a day. It's a way to connect, but also hold yourself accountable to the silence that I think will help each of us.
Yeah, and I think it's recognizing that each of us are kind of faced with different types of challenges right now. So yeah, for us, it might be like finding that moment of silence. For others, it might be too much silence, and you might be living in silence all day, and you actually need the opposite, which is like you need connection, and it's okay to reach out and to say, we need to create connection in whatever way. You drive your car, I'll drive mine, we'll be 10 feet apart, and we'll just park next to each other and talk. Whatever it is that you need to, if you need to find those connections. I think it's been, for Henner and I feel like it's just been a constant tag team. So even though we're actually together all the time, it's like, okay, you take the kids and I'll work. Okay, now I'll take the kids and you work. So we actually haven't had a lot of connection time because it's always tag in, tag out. But I have been getting more training, so that's exciting.
Yeah. And I do something called drive-by highs. I take my kids in the car and we go by somebody that we want to say hi to, call them, I'm like, we're outside, we just want to do a drive-by hi. And then there's like this real energetic thing happening, even if it's just for a moment.
Yeah,
Drive-by
seeing
highs.
people in person makes a big difference. It's crazy.
Does.
Even if they're 10 feet away at least. Or,
Yep.
Yeah. So I think that's a great question. And part of it is identifying how do we even cope, right?
Yeah.
And hopefully you know what that is for you. Or if not, this is a time to like really identify that. And
sitting down with someone in your family and say, how do you think you're coping best with this? And maybe being the honest person saying, I don't know that that's your best coping mechanism.
Yelling at me is not a way to cope.
Or I'd like to try a different one together and see what we can do. But honoring separate coping mechanisms is so important. Please, if you have that thing and you're like, my husband keeps doing this, that might be how he's getting through this. So some real big patience in those is all we ask.
For sure. Great question.
Yeah.
So we wanted to bring up something that was we all became aware of recently in the last week or so, and it became information that both the Jiu-Jitsu community and also the world became aware of, and it's because Claudia Duvall, who is a 3-time black belt world champion in Jiu-Jitsu, incredible athlete, incredible badass, bravely came and revealed her experience, which was that she was sexually abused by her mentor and coach for many years, Ricardo de la Riva. And he is, for those kind of deeper in the Jiu-Jitsu community, know that he is what is kind of revered as like this legend, or is a very well-known name. I mean, he has a position, like a guard position or techniques named after him. So this was a big thing, a big revelation for the Jiu-Jitsu community. And I know personally, I need to process this with somebody. Yeah. Because it's so hard to watch what happens when these women who are so brave, like Claudia, to finally, be able to voice their truths to the world, and knowing what happens after that and watching what happens after that. And it was just, I feel like it's a really good time for us to come together, both in the Jiu-Jitsu community and as women, to just talk about it, process it. And even for some people, you may watch it and it may have triggered something in you or brought up past things for you. So I think this is a good opportunity to not only talk about specifically kind of what happened in that incident, but also just touch on the idea of non-stranger violence that this is actually most likely, if someone's going to encounter violence in their life, this is what the type of violence will look like, and how to identify that.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things when I was watching this interview for me is when she was explaining her experience, she almost had this state of confusion. Like, I can't quite identify what happened to me. She couldn't even put a name to it, because I think for so many of us, we have named what we think sexual abuse or rape or assault to look like, that when she was describing it, she was saying, I wasn't saying no, but my body was not saying yes. I was just there frozen. And it's such a big deal to me to hear that, because it's such an identifier that this space that we get into, and I say we because I think every woman that I know has been in a position with a man that has crossed a boundary, and you sort of freeze. So there's fight, flight, or freeze. And that freeze moment is one of the biggest indicators when I hear her story. Of course, it's all alleged, right? Because there is no video cameras there, there's all these things. But when I hear her story, the resonance of truth that exists for me was that she's exhibiting incredible behaviors that we already have identified as obvious fight, flight, or freeze. And she froze. She couldn't say no, literally, from her voice, because she couldn't.
She said that she literally died inside. Like, she felt like she was dying inside.
Yeah.
As it happened.
So when I watch this, and I'm not someone who's a psychic of any kind, but I literally look at her and I'm like, she's so telling her truth, the truth. And I'm not a lawyer here. I'm not going to say anything other than it's still alleged. But when I listen to her, there's no part of me that doesn't believe her.
That's right. And like you mentioned, I think one of the biggest things that I actually observed too was, the fact that it was difficult. You could tell it was difficult for her to identify it as such. And like many people, and by the way, if you haven't yet seen her interview, I definitely encourage you to watch it, because it is educational, and I think it's an important thing for us to support each other as women through. But the fact that it was difficult for her to label it as abuse, and specifically she said, because I didn't say no. Yeah. And this is what we want to talk about. How do we identify this? And it's a challenge, because for so long, again, abuse or sexual assault has been kind of painted one way, and it's simply not the truth. That there has to be physical violence or aggressive violence in order for a sexual assault to occur, and that is just simply not true.
Especially the non-stranger demographic. It's very nuanced, it's subtle, and it's a difficult identifiable thing.
Right. So we wanted to talk about that kind of a little bit in detail.
But before we do that, I really want to praise Claudia on coming out about this, because this is a very difficult thing to go public about, to even be honest with yourself about, and to be courageous enough to stand in your truth and to go worldwide and say, this happened to me. I want to talk about it, and I want to advocate for the safety of all other women in this world, especially because this person is probably still training other women. I just want to congratulate you, Claudia, for doing that. That is a really big deal.
And the fact that her speaking up is likely going to be what allows other women to maybe come to terms with their own truths that they have not even yet processed or told anyone. And she mentioned in the interview that it took her 2 years to tell anybody. It took her 2 years to tell anyone, and now it's 6 years later, and she's finally relieving herself of that truth to the world. And we just commend her, because we know how hard that it is, and especially for someone who is revered as much as he is, and who has this kind of almost cult-like following, and who's put on this pedestal in jiu-jitsu and in that world, knowing what she's just a warrior. She's ready, you can tell she's finally at that point that she is ready to just relieve this from her, and to do what she really believes in her heart she felt like she needed to do.
And the fight is not even over for her. She already had to fight the 2 years to tell someone, the 6 years to then be here where she is, and now the fight begins with what? People damaging her character off of living her truth, damaging her entire notoriety to say that she's doing this for any ulterior motive. We don't as women take pride off of saying that this happened to our physical essence. That boggles my mind that people want to throw that at anyone. So it's commendable that she came out.
And it gives us an opportunity to, again, learn more about this. The more times we hear about this, we recognize that there's not one picture or face of somebody who's a survivor of abuse. They don't all look the same. They don't all have the same backgrounds. They don't all have the same physical capabilities, right? There's not one person, not one way that a survivor can look.
Yep.
And that's also another important acknowledgement. And she still remains one of the most badass women in the entire world, right?
Yep.
So what we're going to kind of use today as a little bit of a structure for our talk is the Empowerment Handbook. So if you have the physical copy, great. Every single one of you has the downloadable copy. So if you go to gracieuniversity.com, under My Files, it says Women Empowered Handbook 2.0, and you can download that. Whether you don't have to do it now, if you don't have it right in front of you. If you do, go ahead, pull it up. But if not, every one of you can have this, has this. And if you don't have an account on Gracie University, create one, and it's actually a free download in there. And there's a lot of really important information. Like this stuff alone can save somebody's life and really give some context to, the psychology and the mindset of self-defense. So there's a section in this book about non-stranger violence or non-stranger sexual assault. And so we want to kind of use that as something to go off of today and to kind of talk about this.
Especially knowing that non-stranger assaults are 75% of the assaults that are done.
Yeah,
Again,
more than
78, right?
Yeah, and probably even more, because when you think about non-stranger, are probably the ones most likely that people will not report.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, like more than 3 out of 4 assaults are committed by somebody known to the person. We can't drive that home enough, because again, when we not that assaults don't happen by strangers with this kind of aggressive violence, and when somebody in the middle of the street or someone in a parking lot or something like that, those things do happen. But if we always think that that's what it's going to look like, we're doing ourselves a disservice, and we're doing our community a disservice, because we are not open to the idea of the possibility that it looks completely different. And that's why we want to address this today. So page 33, you can either scroll down or go to the book. Page 33 is where we start talking about non-stranger, the 4 phases of a non-stranger assault. And these 4 phases they're kind of categorized by the strategy of the predator, right? Their strategy. And they obviously haven't studied this, right? They don't know what it's called. But they pretty much all follow these phases. It's textbook. And one thing I'll also say is that these 4 phases can be accomplished over 10 years, or it can be accomplished in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So there's no timeline for these phases and how they go about them, but the end result is the same, and it is sexual assault, right? And no matter who the person is, what they look like, what that relationship to you, that fact doesn't change, that it's still considered rape, that it's still considered sexual assault. That remains the same, regardless of whether you know them or not. So the 4 phases, phase 1 is intrusion. Phase 2, desensitization. Phase 3, isolation. And phase 4 is to carry out the assault. So let's talk about intrusion. Phase 1, intrusion. Intrusion is really the introduction of intrusive behaviors, and in order to kind of assess or make their own kind of assessments about what
kind of boundaries you'll put.
What kind of relationship they can create, and what kind of boundaries they can push. And it's just kind of gauging what resistance they may receive. And so it's kind of testing the waters, right? Intrusion is. And I think we'll go back and we'll kind of talk about all the defensive mechanisms to this, but first we'll kind of talk about the 4 phases themselves. So
yeah, and desensitization
is a really hard word to say, but
it's one of those things where if they can build the ability to desensitize your blockade almost of your personal boundaries, then they get you to put your guard down, and they do this in a small stage by stage by stage. Can I do this? No. Oh, I can. Okay, can I go a little further? Oh, okay. And it starts like in coworkers, it's a little bit touching just the shoulders, then it's wrapping the arms a little more, then it's getting more to the private areas. It's a slow, over time desensitization of their intrusive behaviors.
Right. And specifically with desensitization, it's the idea of downplaying any kind of maybe boundaries that are set up. So if you've ever been like, wow, why do I feel crazy right now? Or why is this person making me feel like I don't know what I'm talking about? That's desensitization. So they will specifically, if a boundary is set up, let's say, or say somebody reacts a certain way to an initial intrusive behavior, desensitization is basically them, it's basically gaslighting, and it's basically making them feel like, what's wrong with you? Why are you receiving this way when they're trying to basically create an alternate reality based than what you're actually experiencing and what you're feeling.
One example that could happen is if you're at a family gathering and some family member who's you're not that close with hugs you in a way that is not a normal hug, and then you go, hey, what are you doing? And they're like, oh, sorry, I'm just Uncle so-and-so, I do this to everybody. And they make you feel bad for calling them out on something that did feel yucky.
Right. They may make you feel guilty, they may make you feel shame, they may make you feel embarrassed. There's a lot of different ways that people can try to desensitize you. Now, I will also say that one of the number one tools in desensitizing for them is drugs and alcohol. So that's another way to desensitize someone, where basically what it means is the boundaries become blurry. So you can't even yourself, like, where is the line? Where did it go? It's very cloudy. It's very confusing. And they're very good at this. And it's happened to everyone. I guarantee you that at some point you set a boundary in your life, and whether it's specific to this type of context or not, any kind of boundary, could have been with your mother-in-law, and you set a boundary, and then they said something, and then you naturally went to, oh gosh, did I do something wrong, or am I crazy, or should I feel guilty, or maybe they're right, maybe I'm taking things too seriously, maybe I'm overreacting. So this is desensitization. It's making you question your boundaries, essentially. The next phase is isolation. Now, isolation, I'm going to kind of use that term loosely, but basically the idea is that they use their kind of false sense of intimacy that has been created, or trust, to get you to a place of isolation. So likely the person will willingly go to isolation with this person. They didn't drag them by a wrist grab and take them there. Although that's possible as well, but most likely they use the false sense of trust and say, hey, come over, I want to show you this thing, or want to come to my house and spend time, or, whatever it might be to get them into this isolation. Now, isolation can also mean that they know no one else will intervene.
Yep.
Right? So it doesn't actually have to mean that no one else is around. It may mean that they are fully aware that no one else is going to intervene, because they also have a certain idea of what that relationship might be or could be, and they may not intervene. Or another example could be like at a concert, right? Someone's at a concert, everyone's enjoying everyone's watching what's going on, no one's seeing what's happening over here. So isolation doesn't always mean that you are actually physically by yourself with no one around, although that is most likely. It can also mean a sense of feeling isolated, feeling like no one's going to believe you if you say anything, or if you yell for help, or if you resist right now, no one's going to believe that this is happening.
To stay true to the other desensitization process with like a family party, certain times there are people who can make behaviors normalize. If I do this with everybody at the party, this isn't that weird. So if that person is seen doing that to you and other people look at it, oh, that's just Uncle Tom Tom, that's just what he does. But then he crosses the line with you, then they're like, of course, that's just what he does.
He's just the creepy uncle.
Correct. So it's very common that they use like in plain sight as a very easy means to cross that boundary.
And then phase 4, as we said, is the same as any other assault. It's assault. And it still remains assault. It doesn't matter how well you know them. It doesn't matter what your relationship was.
It doesn't matter to what degree.
If at that point you did not want intercourse or any kind of sexual advance, and then that was made, and also using, again, that false sense of intimacy and trust. And it's also important to recognize that oftentimes violence is not used, kind of aggressive violence. It's not used in this. It's basically just enough physical force so that you will not resist is usually what it means. And they are more using the kind of sense of control and power and coercion, and also a lot of that desensitization to make somebody potentially believe that this is the natural progression of their relationship, right? So that is how phase 4 is carried out, but it is still assault. If the person does not consent, it is sexual assault, period. That's it. So now let's kind of go in and talk about some survival strategies for these phases, right? Because that's now the picture. And again, this is so important, because really what we want to do is give it a name, give it a definition, and go, that's what's happening. So the next time this happens to you, you go, oh, I see what you're doing. You're trying to desensitize me. But if we don't have this conversation while we're out of the context, it's really, 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 really hard to identify it while it's happening.
Even for us, we've both been in positions where we're like, are they doing what I think they're doing?
Yeah, and this will continue to happen. But the key is, even if you can't identify it in the moment, then at least be able to identify it after the fact and say, I see what that was. And really that's our goal, is to just identify this, so that we don't have to think that we're crazy. We don't have to question ourselves and our gut feelings about what this was or was not. So phase 1, intrusion, right? So our you want to hold this? Yes. Phase 1, intrusion. The survival strategy for this, and really for a lot of what we're going to cover right now, is boundary setting, right? Is the ability to set boundaries with others. Now, what's challenging about this is that a lot of these intrusive behaviors may have even been completely normal in certain contexts, or even wanted in certain contexts. And so it's not always, a completely clear, cut and dry way to say, oh, just set a boundary. Because again, depending on what that relationship is, there might be some other, even kind of pre-existing understandings about what this relationship is, where a boundary wouldn't be set. Now, that being said, if it is a situation where it's like, oh no, I feel pretty confident that this is not something I want, or that felt intrusive and I didn't feel good about it, right? Then setting boundaries really is our number one tool that we can pull out. And I think we can probably do an entire session on boundary setting and all the nuances. But let's just say this, and I think that there's a few things that we can talk about that, and that's also in the handbook. There is one way to really kind of clear, I would say the clearest way to define a boundary. We call it the 3-part statement. And really what that is, it's identifying the behavior, identifying how it makes you feel, and then identifying your desired outcome. 3 parts: the behavior, how it makes you feel, your desired outcome. So when you continue to offer me drinks, even though I've told you that I'm not going to drink anymore, it makes me feel like you're not respecting my boundaries or what I have to say. I'd like you to stop. 3 parts.
Easy.
Very clear, right? Not actually easy always, but
no, I'm saying easy to them.
Yes,
It's a very easy thing to, sir.
Correct.
Like,
yes.
Not for us. It is a very
for
difficult
sure,
thing.
yeah. But yeah, for them, that is about as clear as it can get.
Yep.
Here's the exact behavior I'm telling you. Here's how it makes me feel. So there's no ambiguity about the fact that this is making me feel uncomfortable. And here's what I want. I want you to stop asking me to drink, or whatever that might be. Right? So the 3 parts. And again, like we said, it actually is not always easy to use those, but that is clarity is key when it comes to boundary setting.
Yes.
And this is why it's such a great tool, is because the moment you set a boundary with anyone, it is a very clear indicator whether this person is on your team or not, and whether this is somebody you want to keep around you, and whether this is somebody you want to further a relationship with. And if there's anything that we can kind of that we can really own, not that we can always kind of practice it, but just own in our mind, is that I have the right to set boundaries with people. Anyone. I have the right to do that. And if they question my boundaries, or if they feel disrespected by my boundaries, or if they start to make me feel crazy after I set boundaries, or if they make me feel guilty after I set boundaries, what does that tell me about them, right? And how far can this go? And so that is, that's kind of I would say the most important thing about setting boundaries, is it's just a simple tool to go, I know right away who my friends are. If I say, Vic, when you talked to me about that, I didn't feel comfortable. She would 100% say, oh my gosh.
Oh my God, my bad.
My bad.
Never again.
Never again. All good.
Simple.
Right?
But if they're like, what? That's so crazy. What do you mean? I would never do that to you.
You think I'm a bad person?
Yeah.
Or what? However that goes down, anything other than just respect of it, you go, something's not right here. And that is why it's such a beautiful tool. Boundary setting. And we're going to get more into it in future, I think, live sessions, because there's we can talk about all different kinds of ways to set boundaries, but that is our basic tool for when it comes to this. Now, let's say the boundary has been set. Now we go into phase 2, right? Which is desensitization. And again, maybe a boundary wasn't even set, and that's okay, right? We're at no point in this, we're talking about survival strategies, but this doesn't mean that if a boundary wasn't set in phase 1, that phase 2 was warranted. That is not how this works, right? At any point, someone has a right to set a boundary, and at any point, someone has a right to go along with what's happening, because they don't feel threatened. But the moment they feel like this doesn't feel right, you have a right to set a boundary.
I think what she's saying is you also have a right to change your mind at any given time. You could say yes, then no, then yes, then no, then yes, then no. You can.
You have the right to do that. So now desensitization, and this is where it gets challenging, because now you've set a boundary potentially. And now the desensitization starts to happen and you start to feel crazy or guilty or shame or anything else that makes you go, okay, maybe this actually is what a normal relationship is or a healthy relationship is, or this is just the nature of our relationship. And so what kind of tools do we have for that? And again, this comes down to just being able to identify it as such, being able to identify the fact that they're trying to desensitize you. So when you do get pushback from boundary setting, it's nice, and I think we address it in here too in the boundary section, but it is nice to be able to have a follow-up when there's pushback. And so, with a coworker at work who, when you just say, when you give me a hug and a kiss on my cheek every time I see you, it makes me feel a little uncomfortable. I prefer handshakes. Can I have handshakes from now on? When you say that to them and then they go, what? Don't flatter yourself. Right? Like you think you think you're shame, making you feel
Blame.
like, embarrassment, and saying, oh, I do that to everybody. You're not hot shit, whatever they want to say, minimizing. When they do that, then you can then respond with, oh, I see. You are trying to make me feel guilty or embarrassed because I set a boundary with you. So you can call out exactly what it is that they're trying to accomplish and the fact that you set a boundary with them. So that's one other kind of like pushback tool, is just identifying exactly what you're saying is like, oh, you're trying to make me feel guilty because I said this. Okay. And that's, a clear way, even if they don't get it, it's good for you to even be able to say, this is what's happening. Right.
And that can be a difficult subtlety, especially with relationships that have taken years to have, like with family members or some friend that you've been friends for years with, because you have a basically large Rolodex of pre-patterned behaviors that you've already deemed okay for so many years. So that desensitization has happened for so long that you might feel weird going, wait, you've always hugged me like this for the last 5 years, and all of a sudden his creep level turned up. But so you feel like you can't say no to those hugs anymore, and you can't just turn back time, but you can now say, hey, I don't know why, but I'm not into those hugs anymore. Can we try something different? And it will feel strange to address someone you've known for so long with new behaviors. It's why family members hold so much resentment when someone decides to do something different in their lives, because we've pre-programmed human beings in our minds, even from our in-laws to our own parents. My mom will always respond this way. My dad always responds that way. We don't even allow people a new day, a new way of existing. So it only makes sense that you have digested this way of interacting with this person who now has turned creepy on you. Also that you can't change that with them. And we are hopefully allowing you to tell your mind, I give myself permission to rewrite the script from moment to moment to moment. The minute they turn creepy, or then maybe, hey, I misinterpreted that creepiness. Actually, I'm attracted to them. Let's go. So this is you get to drive the steering wheel, you get to press the brakes or the gas whenever that makes sense.
And that is, I think, the key to phase 2, that desensitization at any point. Okay, don't feel like because a boundary wasn't set in phase 1, or that it's already gotten to a certain point and you go, well, gosh, it's gotten this far. You have the right to set boundaries whenever you want, and you give yourself permission. We give you permission. Everyone has permission to this. Here you go. If you needed it from somebody, it's from us.
Enjoy.
Okay, some people are like, but somebody needs it. No, you give yourself permission for this. And that is really the key to, there's no point in a relationship where it's like, oh, it's already gotten this far. And now this is just the nature of it. We can always put those boundaries
Rewrite it.
And guess what? The same tool is going to be used in isolation. Once isolation is accomplished, which means that now, let's say it has gotten to a point where the relationship has maybe seemingly been, and actually this might be a good context to kind of bring in Claudia's story, where she said, I looked at him as a father figure. And he even said, she's like my daughter. Yep. He was twice her age. And she said, I looked at him as I know. It's hard to hear and hard to watch and hard to think, because we've all actually probably known somebody who gave you those same kind of vibes. But as someone who she felt the nature of their relationship was as a father figure. So when he said, I'm going to come over and I want you to give me a massage. At first, it's like, what it sounded like to me is that she was shocked by that and kind of like, but then her program, she's like, wait, he's a father figure to me. I could give my dad a massage. Like that's okay behavior, because he's a father to me. Like that he used the fact that they had created this false sense of intimacy, of father-daughter connection. And he used that to create isolation. That's what he used. And it was still, it was a tool that he used. It's not that, oh, this just happened. No, he specifically built this up over years and years and years of trust and giving and, making her feel like she needed him in order to, to continue to compete. And
we're not saying that he had this premeditated idea to do this. We're no accusation of that, because we have no clue when his mind shifted to wanting to do this act again. But we're saying it's a common occurrence that when the desensitization and the grooming happens, that it can happen over all this time. And because in her situation she felt so comfortable, he had built that trust with her.
Right. And she even said, like, I had never gotten that vibe from him before. So it's not like those intrusive behaviors even started way before. Right. It's almost like it was just a relationship that was building up a trust, and then isolation happened. Yeah. And then it's kind of like, then once it almost happened out of order, right? And not that there is any order, but these could happen. It could be isolation first, then intrusive behaviors, then desensitization. And that's kind of what actually the order that it happened in her situation. But it is strategic. And we don't know at what point he decided that. Maybe it was that day, but this is what was used to create to accomplish isolation. And not only that, but even after it happened, she still felt isolated, because he knew that nobody would believe her, that he had built up so much kind of credit and trust and notoriety in his community that he would be the one people would believe instead of her. And that's another form of isolation, to be able to kind of coerce somebody into something like this, is saying, knowing that maybe his belief was that no one would believe her. Little does he know that there's a lot of women and people and men who believe her.
Listen, when it comes to the idea of putting people on a pedestal, or authority figures, or someone that you've idolized in general, there is an easy psychological, obscuring that they could be doing any wrong. And that is a difficult thing for the humanization of what happened for Claudia. There is a point that when I sit behind this, I'm like, wow, if all of these things are in fact true, there are a huge subset of humans, predominantly male, that will still back him up, because they cannot conceive that this honorable person who's been doing jiu-jitsu, amazingness for years, could have a flaw in their idea and morals and ethics. And I would like to just introduce the idea that pedestals can really be a deterrent to our own even intuitive ability to go, what is this person really capable of? Guess what? We're all human. We're all capable of the dark and the light. The choice every day is what we choose. Do you choose light or do you choose dark? I don't care how much light you've done in your entire life. Anyone is capable of flipping the switch. If someone wants to if someone is holding a gun to my children's head, I will do whatever it takes to save my children. Therefore, I'm willing to possibly shoot someone. And that means I'm capable of darkness. That means any person who is held on this extreme pedestal, who has done years and years of work of goodness, can fall off just as quickly. It's a hard thing to swallow. And for the community who has revered anyone for such deep work, it's going to be a really devastating blow to reputations, to legacies, to communities who have built their life around these schools. And I hold so much compassion for the difficulty in your mind and in your family normality that it's going to shake. But I beg of you to open space of the possibility that this is true. And that any woman out there who has experienced something like this with someone who has been held on a pedestal, that you are willing to not only speak your truth, but advocate for yourself, despite the fact that his authority or highlighted celebrity type-esque in town, whether it's the mayor or whatever, could possibly demonize you as a human being who is just speaking your truth. And it's very common that victim blaming happens, and that demonizing a woman for, well, she wanted it, she asked for it, or she engaged in it, and maybe she said yes first. Maybe it was a mutual attraction, and then he took it too far. We are here to say that any point that you want to say no, or even how Claudia said, she didn't verbally say no, but her physicality said everything. In my opinion, it's something that we need to advocate for women to just stand up for, and not just women, men.
Snap, ladies.
All day.
Snap. Okay, snap if you're with
I
me.
see all the hearts. I can see the hearts.
Hearts.
Love you too.
Yes. So good. So important. And you know what's hard is especially in the jiu-jitsu community, and this is why, like, for especially a lot of you who are in the jiu-jitsu community with us, that this is something we love you, and this is why it's so important to have to have women empowered, but not just that, but to have instructors that don't take advantage of this trust and this relation, this pedestal that they can essentially be put on sometimes. And this does happen a lot in the jiu-jitsu community, unfortunately. I know.
I hate even hearing this, because we have obviously ties with so many schools around the world, and there's something in my stomach that irks me to think that any possible human, again, that we even put on our site, like we trust them, could possibly switch at any given moment and make a bad decision. And
luckily we drill this home with every one of our instructors, and this is a talk that the guys have very well, Henner and he don't have very well, and say, look, you're never to misinterpret the fact that a student of yours values you for what you give to them, what you bring to their life, the jiu-jitsu or the lifestyle, or because it is all beauty, right? We love our instructors and we're grateful for them.
Yes.
And they said you are never to misinterpret that and think that is more than just them appreciating you for your jiu-jitsu. And the moment that happens, that's when people get into trouble, and that's when that's when these types of situations happen, because there was kind of a misunderstanding of them getting a little bit too kind of a big head, or misunderstanding the appreciation that somebody has for an invitation to engage, and that's just simply not the case.
Or let's be clear, when we created and understood the vulnerability that happens, we didn't create the vulnerability. When we create a space for vulnerability to exist, we opened our hearts and our mats to women, and we say, bring it. Bring all that you feel, the good, the bad, and the ugly, everything that you've been through. We are here for you. Spill it on this mat. We'll process it with you. We'll transcend all of that yuckiness, wrap it into a beautiful package, and help heal you. When we do that with women, and men have not felt the oppressive nature of what it feels like to be a female, or the constant, persistent eyeballs and talking about our physicality our whole lives, it's hard for them to have the empathy and see that huge growth that we bring to the mat. So when they exist in it and they're a part of it, women naturally feel like, you were a part of my healing. You were here for me during that time. You had those talks, you held space, you opened your ears. It only makes sense, ladies, that you look at that instructor and you go, I am grateful to you. You are an amazing contributor to my growth and to my journey. It only makes sense that you trust in them. And we're asking you to know that you can trust in people and should trust until you can't. And that's all we're asking you, is to have discernment and not to give all unending trust. It's just to say, I trust you.
And how do we know, how do we trust ourselves, right? How do we know once we have that feeling where we go, that didn't feel right? And what do I do about this? And this is why, the boundary setting is, again, and it makes sense in a nutshell. When you go, oh, okay, set a boundary, and then the person will either stop or not. But it is we know that it's much more difficult than this. And we even talk about in the handbook as well, how it actually becomes harder to set boundaries with people when here, maybe you can pull it up, but basically the perceived power goes up, and as familiarity goes up. Right? So the more familiar you are with somebody, the closer you are to somebody, it can actually be harder to set boundaries with them.
Let me help you.
Look at that chart, right? So for people, this is where it becomes the most challenging, which is, this might even be backwards, right? I don't know if you can read backwards.
Sorry.
But perceived power and familiarity. And so think about, for example, in Claudia's situation, where not only does this man have perceived power, right? Because he is the head of this organization. He was her mentor and her coach.
Yeah.
But also extreme familiarity. She had known him for years and years and years. And so it's not that, oh, why wouldn't you just say this or that? Or why wouldn't you just say no? Or why wouldn't you just because it's so hard. Number one, to even identify the fact that you need to set a boundary because the trust has been there.
Yeah.
You have to first acknowledge that you almost have to let go of everything that you just thought about this person and think about, like, there's some grief there, right? To basically say, wow, there's a chance that this person is not actually who I think they are. And that's a really hard thing for people to come to terms with. And I'm sure people are doing that now, as you said, compassion for even his community, for people who are going, wait, they're grieving the potentially the master that they thought he was and the person that he thought he was. And now they're going, wow.
And they deserve to grieve him. They honestly deserve, because they put him up on a pedestal. This is a processing for them as well. I'm not going to take that away from them at all. But the truth must come out.
Yeah, but it's not easy, right? And that's really the point, is that it's not easy to do this. But it helps, and the reason why we're having this talk is to at least be able to identify it and to say, okay, that this is what I think it is. And this is a violation. And this is, potentially somebody violating my boundaries or trying to assault me. And this is still sexual assault. This is still sexual abuse, even though I didn't say no, or even though I didn't physically fight them off. And so the more we can kind of really come to terms with that, it can help us heal after the fact as well. And that's really what we want for anyone who has experienced this.
Do you think, Eve, that people, they don't want to call it sexual abuse because that feels like such an extreme thing that should be taken to court or should be done in some way? Like, would it help them to first just say he took advantage of me? Just that one little step. And once they can own that, then maybe they can go, actually, you're right, this was abuse. Because when I was a child, if I were to go to my mom and said, so-and-so abused me, it would have been like, now we have to go to court, now we have to go talk. Like, it would have been so big, I couldn't have said that to her. There was no part of me that could have said that.
Of course.
And I understand the hesitation to not only be honest with yourself about it, but to tell someone else. So do you think that there's something that they could at least first tell themselves and go, okay, I don't need to call it abuse just yet, but he did take advantage of me. Yeah. Even though we want to normalize abuse. I know that we want to do that.
Well, and this was part of my healing, actually, was the more it actually took me being able to educate women about what this was. For me, I had to drill it in my head over and over, and it took me 10 years to admit that I was a survivor of rape. And it took me that long and that many times saying it over and over. And so even if you have to say it in the, it's almost like, look at it from the outside, maybe you're not ready to look at your situation, but at least look at Claudia's situation, maybe look at somebody else's situation and go, okay, I see how that is considered assault. But there is something that is so freeing once you can do that. Yeah. And it's not easy, and it will take time. And it also doesn't mean, it will mean different things for different people. And you don't need to, I think a lot of people are scared, like you said, of that, that labeling of it.
Yeah.
And that it makes them a victim, or I don't feel like a victim, or I don't want to be a victim, or
because then I have to deal with it. If it was abuse, now I have to do something about
it. That was exactly why many women are in denial for so long, because it's like you just would rather go, I'm going to put this in a box, throw it away, and I'm going to try not to think about that for the rest of my life. And it's not healthy. It can be done, but it's not our healthiest path. And so we want to empower you to whatever steps you need to take in your life. And it might not be telling somebody. It might just be having some conversations with yourself and being open and compassionate with yourself. And I think the other part of this, which is worth mentioning, is the shame and the guilt. Right? That's the other reason why it is hard to identify it as such, because there's so much shame and guilt around it. And I think that, once we can relieve ourselves of that, that is when it's almost easier to say, no, that was not my fault. And this was not her fault, and it's not your fault either.
Yeah. And if there is anything that I could offer as a processing tool for anyone who has had any variation or degree of experience of any kind of abuse towards yourself, I have personally found that journaling is highly productive for processing. That is, writing your story from how you felt at that moment, writing your story from how you felt the next day, and then today, and then writing your story if you could rewrite the story. Writing your story as the empowered woman that maybe you are now or that you want to be. And it doesn't matter if you're writing 3 sentences or 5 books. Writing it and writing it and writing it and writing and getting it out and getting it out and getting out. It's one of the most beautiful ways of processing. And if you want to be incredibly witchy about it, which I like to do sometimes, I straight up take the papers and make a little bonfire, and I like either do it in a safe thing, or I've done it on the beach. Don't tell anybody, but I've done it. So burning the pages and literally saying,
and don't judge yourself either. Like I
Yeah.
used to do that, where I'd be like thinking about what to write. Just
write it.
Write, and then forget about it or not.
Write it,
Yeah.
burn it, don't,
Burn it, whatever
fireplace, throw it, enjoy it.
Yeah, that's a great tool.
Yeah.
So I think in kind of recapping on where we were with those 4 phases, you know, is basically it's never too late. Never too late to set a boundary. And even if you have to set a physical boundary and you have to employ a technique, you are warranted to use your physical techniques, even if it's somebody you know, even if it's you know, a relationship that has grown to be something that you love and appreciate. If you get to phase 4, even if it's somebody you know, you are warranted and allowed and should feel like you can use your physical techniques, your verbal techniques, your boundary setting, and it's never too late. And just because it was not sent earlier does not mean there's never a time period. At any point, you get to say what happens to your body. Straight up, simple as that.
I've also got another exercise for all of you. If you can, try saying no first to everything that happens over the next week. No. Just try saying no. And then in like 5 minutes or even 3 seconds or 10 minutes, actually, yeah, I'm okay with that. Try saying no first. See how that goes. Because I know for many women, we were born people pleasers. Mm-hmm. The better we were, oh, good girl. We were taught good girl. Mm-hmm. We're the generations of good girls.
Good girls.
I'm going to exit that for your mind just for a week and say no first. And don't people please. And then if you want to change your mind to a yes, even though you even know you want to say yes to that, just see how that works. No first.
No first.
Try it.
No, I'm not going to put
Well done! Already aced! You're so good at this.
Nailed it.
Nailed it.
So I wonder if there's anything else you want to say on this specifically, or if we have some time for
I think we have a little bit of time for questions.
Maybe specifically about this. I once again just want to like wrap up the Claudia Duvall situation and just again say how, you know, obviously we wanted to highlight this and to you know, use it as a kind of like an experience that we can kind of use to just to learn about ourselves and about humans and about how we work and about how these things are really difficult.
And how she's not alone. You're not alone.
You're not alone.
We're not alone.
She's not alone. We're all in this together, and we're here to support each other. Also, if you guys can, I'm sure that she is, I'm sure she's getting a lot of support, but I'm sure she's also getting a lot of people who are not in support of her. So anyone who just wants to send her like messages and love, and I'm sure all the love would be appreciated right now by her. And I think that,
like that.
she is somebody who definitely would appreciate that and deserves that.
Cool.
Alia, do we have any questions?
No.
Oh, someone asked about if you can make a video about like a creepy side hug, but you already have.
Oh, yeah, we've already done that. No,
Nice
the
to
question's
see our
about
creepy side hug.
we got all the hugs, all the hug defenses. Anything specific to this topic? You know?
Or we can ask you now. Do any of you guys have any questions specific to this
And you can
topic?
watch what comes up.
Non-stranger.
Someone's asking about what are some ways or tips to reinforce your boundaries?
So you want to get into it already. The
Oh,
boundaries,
yeah.
we said we were going to do another video on it, but yes, I can't resist.
So here's the thing. Like she said, if you set a boundary and they trample it, shame it, try to bypass it, humor around it, it is difficult to have to repeat yourself like every mom knows to their kid. I said no, 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 because I said so. And I think it's really important to reinstate the idea that because I said so, just because. Sometimes we get into what we call the justification loop, where we start to justify and then justify and justify. Well, because I don't feel comfortable with the it doesn't matter. There is no
need a reason
that I have to give any human being as to why I don't like them touching my body a certain way. Because I said so. Back up. I don't like it.
That's the only reason you need.
That's it. So thanks, Mom, for teaching me that because I said so.
Totally.
And now we can use it in our daily life. Anything to add to that?
Well, I think the other thing is we gave you like that 3-part kind of statement and strategy, which is a very clear one. But I will say that it's not always easy to be that formal about setting a boundary, depending on your relationship. And so, and we do touch on this in the handbook as well, but like there's just some different tactics. Like some people use humor to set boundaries where you're just like, hey, back up, or whatever it might be, where the person like is able to get a hint, and you might feel like that's your tool at that moment. There's no one right way. And we also don't want anyone feeling shame or guilt for not setting boundaries, right? It's so important that it again, at any point you decide to do that, you get to do that. And you can also do it in your way. You can come up with your own way that feels comfortable for you. For some people it's humor, for some people it's more abrupt and it's like, yo, back up. Other people it's a little bit softer and it's a little bit, and you feel like, you need to kind of ease yourself into setting a boundary, and you start a little bit softer and you kind of work up.
Other people go crazy. Just to go crazy, go nuts. Who cares?
Yes.
Back up!
Right. And we talk about some of those different strategies in the handbook as well. But there are different ways. And I wish I could tell you which way would work best for you, but this
Try
is
them
something.
all.
And here's the other thing about boundary setting. It's just like any other technique. You got to practice it. And you can practice it with small things, like Victoria said. It's like, hey, can you do the dishes? Nope.
Can you watch the kids? Nope. Can you take out the dog for a walk? Nope.
No. Yeah, you can practice it in those ways. But you can even practice it in the mirror. Like maybe, have you ever had something happen where afterwards you're like, why didn't I say something? You can almost practice after the fact and say, here's what I want to say to that person. And look in the mirror and say, like, repeat what you wanted to say to them and say it right in the mirror to yourself. And then you're just building that muscle, right? And even if it's something where somebody, not that this would happen these days, cut you in line. I will say the good thing about social distancing is people have never been so kind. They're like, after you, sir. No, after you, man. You go first. But let's say somebody cuts you off in line and you're like, oh, that wasn't, like it's something small, but like for you to say, excuse me, the line's back there. I was in this place, or whatever you got to say, to just like stand up for yourself a little bit and go, whew, that felt good.
Yeah.
All right. I'm practicing. Just practice little ways. And everyone also has a different default. Some people, their default is to be like, more of like put up walls around them. And other people are it's really hard for them. And naturally they feel I don't want to be rude. I don't want to be polite. I want to be polite. I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. And we finally got to get to the point where we recognize that we're more important than any of that, and that we deserve the right to set boundaries. And it doesn't always matter what people think. If we feel unsafe or uncomfortable, we should prioritize ourselves when it comes to that. And you can always later, if after the fact you feel like, I started a boundary with somebody, and later you feel like you want to, talk about it or kind of address it in a way that, say, if you felt like, potentially could have harmed a relationship, you can always address it after. But like let's practice that default of feeling comfortable with setting boundaries. Let's practice that.
That's so great.
So I think we have 2 minutes left.
Yeah.
Oh, they cut us off at an hour?
Yeah, that's what they do.
Just
This
kidding.
live.
Hour was great with you guys.
One last thing to do that I do is I do visualizations. So I'm an overthinker by nature. So I try to run through every scenario. I run through every scenario.
I'm sure none of you are like that either. Sure, nobody.
We all are, right? No, just me. I run through every scenario in my mind, before it happens, after it happens. What could I have said? How could I have acted? How could they have responded? And sometimes sitting with it and choosing the mental movies that you actually want it to play down as might be really beneficial. So imagine yourself as the most empowered human being in the world, a female. In what armor are you wearing? What beautiful wings are coming out of your back? How is your hair so beautifully done?
What cup are you drinking out of?
Wonder Woman. So once you sit in this visualization of your most powerful self, how can you resonate in that and walk through the world, walk through your home, shower? How do you shower? How does that woman shower when she's so powerful? And if you can start with those visualizations instead of the overthinking where it goes to the negative, this will turn your world upside down in a beautiful way.
Yes. You were the one who told me about that. Oh wait, okay, we have 45 seconds left.
Go.
But the one about the book, right?
Which
With the kids who wore costumes?
Ah, yes.
Was that you?
It was Taya who told me about this. Basically, there was a test that did with these kids that they had to unlock these different safes. And the first one, they just gave normal keys to, and they gave up. The second one, they said, just pretend you're a superhero. They lasted longer. But the last one, they got into a superhero costume, and they didn't give up. But the key didn't go to that lock. So they said they had to stop him. They're like, no, Batman doesn't give up.
So wear your Wonder Woman costume, whatever costume it is, but know that that actually is empowering. Or maybe it's your pink rash guard. Who knows? You guys, we're so grateful that you joined us today.
Thanks
We
for
miss
being
all of
here.
you. And we hope to do this again soon. And we hope you guys stay safe.
Bye.